At 64 years old, when Hollywood had already discarded most actresses of her generation, a woman walked onto the Oscar stage and held the golden statue for the first time in her life. 45 years of career, decades of being called just a scream queen. And now, at the moment the world least expected it, the industry that had thrown her away was giving her a standing ovation. But this victory hides a war almost no one knows about. There's an actress who was born into Hollywood royalty, daughter of two of cinema's biggest stars, but grew up starving for attention. A woman who saved millions from a masked killer on screen, but nearly couldn't save herself from the demons she hid in medicine cabinets. Someone who was discarded by the industry at 40, resurrected her career at 60, and proved that the ending of your story doesn't have to be written by those who underestimate you. Behind the success the world celebrates, there's an addiction that almost destroyed her. Hidden pills, alcohol that numbed the pain her parents' fame never acknowledged, an entire decade performing sobriety while disappearing from the inside, and a daughter whose revelation would shatter and rebuild everything she thought she knew about unconditional love. How does someone born with everything end up feeling invisible? What happens when the role that made you famous becomes the prison that defines your career? Why did a decade of addiction remain hidden while she smiled for cameras? And how, after being forgotten, discarded, and written out of the story, did she come back to prove Hollywood wrong? But before we understand how she won the Oscar nobody expected, we need to go back in time, to a childhood where fame was abundant, but love was rationed. To the moment when the daughter of legends discovered that being born under spotlights doesn't mean being truly seen. November 22nd, 1958, Los Angeles, California. Jamie Lee Curtis entered the world not as an ordinary child, but as Hollywood royalty. Her father, Tony Curtis, the dark-haired heartthrob whose smile could melt screens, was at the peak of his stardom. Her mother, Janet Leigh, immortalized forever as Marion Crane, the woman whose death in Psycho's shower scene became the most iconic murder in cinema history. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale. Two of Hollywood's most beautiful stars, a mansion in Beverly Hills, magazine covers, premier red carpets. Baby Jamie, photographed in her mother's arms, seemed destined for a charmed life bathed in golden California sunlight. But fairy tales are built for audiences, not for the children living inside them. Behind the gates of their Beverly Hills estate, the Curtis household was crumbling. Tony Curtis, magnetic on screen, was cold and distant at home, a man consumed by his own stardom, by the relentless hunger for more roles, more acclaim, more conquest. He was rarely present, and when he was, his attention drifted elsewhere. Jamie would later confess with painful honesty, "My father was a stranger who occasionally appeared at dinner." Janet Leigh, despite her elegance and talent, was trapped in her own gilded cage. The pressures of maintaining beauty, relevance, and the illusion of a perfect marriage left little room for the messy, unglamorous work of motherhood. She loved her daughters, Jamie and her older sister Kelly, but that love was delivered in carefully measured doses, polished and restrained like everything else in their public lives. Jamie grew up surrounded by fame, but starving for attention. Studio lots became her playgrounds, but they were lonely ones. While other children played with friends, she wandered sound stages watching strangers pretend to be families more loving than her own. "I learned early," she would later admit, "that performance was valued more than presence." And then came the shattering blow. In 1962, when Jamie was only 4 years old, her parents divorced. The headlines screamed scandal. Tony Curtis had fallen for a younger actress, Christine Kaufman, abandoning Janet and their daughters for a newer, shinier version of love. For Jamie, the divorce was not just the end of her parents' marriage. It was the end of any illusion that she had ever truly mattered. Custody was divided. Weekends with her father became exercises in awkwardness. Visits where Tony's new wives, and there would be many, smiled politely, but never truly saw her. Her mother, meanwhile, retreated into work, into the armor of independence, leaving Jamie and Kelly to navigate childhood largely on their own. Years later, Jamie would describe those years with devastating clarity. "I was the daughter of movie stars, but I felt invisible. I had everything except the one thing I needed most, to be seen." By her late teens, Jamie Lee Curtis stood at a crossroads. She could reject Hollywood entirely, flee from the shadow of her parents' legacy, and carve out a life far from cameras and comparison. Or she could step into the very industry that had shaped and scarred her, and prove she was more than just Tony and Janet's daughter. She chose the latter. But Hollywood, as always, was merciless. Her first attempts at acting were met with skepticism. Casting directors saw her last name before they saw her face. "You're pretty, but you're not your mother," one director told her bluntly. The comparisons were relentless. She didn't have Janet's delicate beauty, didn't possess Tony's effortless charisma. She was something different, something rawer, and in Hollywood's eyes, that made her lesser. She scraped together small television roles, a guest spot here, a forgettable character there. Nothing that sparked recognition, nothing that felt like hers. The weight of being born into Hollywood royalty was supposed to open doors, but instead, it became a glass ceiling. She was too much of a legacy to be ignored, but not enough of one to be truly wanted. Then, in 1978, everything changed. A young, unknown director named John Carpenter was casting a low-budget horror film. The script was simple, almost crude. A masked killer stalks a babysitter on Halloween night. The budget was a laughable $300,000. No major studio backed it. No stars were attached. It was, by every measure, a gamble destined to be forgotten. But Carpenter saw something in Jamie that others had missed. Not her pedigree, not her famous name, but her raw, unpolished presence. A vulnerability mixed with strength. An every woman quality that made audiences believe she could be their neighbor, their sister, themselves. Jamie Lee Curtis became Laurie Strode. Halloween was shot in just 21 days. Jamie earned $8,000 for her work, a sum so small it barely registered. She had no idea, none of them did, that they were creating a phenomenon. When the film was released in October 1978, it detonated. Against its tiny budget, it earned over $70 million worldwide, becoming one of the most profitable independent films ever made. Overnight, Jamie Lee Curtis was no longer just the daughter of. She was the scream queen, the final girl, the babysitter who survived. But survival on screen came with a price off it. Halloween's success should have been liberation. Instead, it became a new prison. Hollywood, with its ruthless efficiency, immediately typecast her. She was the girl who screamed, the victim who ran, the terror in wide eyes. Offer after offer poured in, but they were all the same. Horror films, slasher sequels, B-movie thrillers. The Fog, Prom Night, Terror Train, Halloween 2, Halloween 3 discussions, all within just a few years. She was working constantly, but she was trapped. Critics dismissed her as a scream queen, a label dripping with condescension. It implied she was disposable, replaceable, a novelty rather than a serious actress. The shadow of her parents' legacy, which she thought she had escaped, was now replaced by a different shadow. The shadow of Michael Myers' knife. Jamie fought back. She took roles in comedies, Trading Places opposite Eddie Murphy, where she proved she could be funny, sexy, sharp. She starred in A Fish Called Wanda, earning critical praise. She showed range, versatility, depth, but the label stuck. In Hollywood's mind, she would always be Laurie Strode running from danger, never the one creating art. The cruel irony was not lost on her. Her mother, Janet Leigh, had faced the same curse. After Psycho, despite a long and varied career, Janet was forever Marion Crane, forever the woman screaming in the shower. Now Jamie, despite her efforts, was forever the woman screaming in Haddonfield. She later admitted with bitter honesty, "I escaped my parents' shadow, only to find myself trapped in another one. This time, it was a shadow shaped like a knife." By the mid-1980s, exhaustion set in. The constant work, the constant dismissal, the relentless grind of fighting for respect in an industry that refused to give it. She was in her late 20s, but she felt decades older. The pressure was building, the cracks beginning to show. And in those cracks, something dark began to take root. A need to numb the disappointment, to silence the voices that whispered she would never be enough. The pills started small, just something to help her sleep after long days on set. Just something to quiet the anxiety before auditions. But addiction, like Michael Myers, never stays small for long. The Scream Queen was about to face a horror far more terrifying than any script could imagine. One that would nearly destroy her before she ever had the chance to truly become herself. It started innocently, the way addiction always does. A prescription for painkillers after a minor surgery. Vicodin, the doctor said, just for a few days to manage discomfort. Take as needed. Jamie took them. And then she kept taking them. At first, it was relief. The pills didn't just numb physical pain, they quieted something deeper. The relentless anxiety of auditions where she was dismissed before she spoke. The exhaustion of being reduced to screams when she wanted to be seen as an artist. The loneliness of a childhood that fame had stolen and a career that fame had trapped. One pill became two. Two became four. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. By the late 1980s, Jamie Lee Curtis, Hollywood's Scream Queen, was hiding pill bottles in bathroom cabinets, in purse pockets, in places her husband wouldn't think to look. She had married Christopher Guest in 1984, a man who seemed to offer the stability her childhood had lacked. Guest, a musician and filmmaker, came from his own aristocratic lineage. He was an actual British baron. But titles and talent couldn't compete with the beast growing inside Jamie's medicine cabinet. She later described those years with searing honesty. "I was a functioning addict. I showed up to work. I smiled for cameras. I played the role of successful actress. But inside, I was disappearing." The pills consumed her thoughts. How many were left? Where could she get more? What excuse would work with the next doctor? She became an expert manipulator, rotating pharmacies, inventing ailments, perfecting the performance of pain. The irony was devastating. The woman who built her career on authentic screams of terror was now performing a different kind of terror, one hidden behind a smile. Alcohol joined the pills. Wine at dinner became wine at lunch, became vodka hidden in water bottles. She wasn't falling down drunk, She was too controlled for that, too aware of the performance required. But she was numbed, floating through a life that felt increasingly unreal. Her work suffered in ways only she could see. Lines took longer to memorize, concentration fractured. The sharp wit that made her brilliant in comedies dulled into something slower, heavier. She knew she was losing herself, but stopping felt impossible. The pills had become the only thing keeping the pain at bay, even as they created new pain, deeper and more destructive. Christopher noticed. How could he not? But addiction builds walls, even love struggles to climb. Arguments turned circular. Denial, promises, temporary sobriety, followed by relapse. Jamie was ashamed, furious at herself, but the shame only drove her deeper into the pills, a vicious cycle spinning faster and faster. Then came 1999. A moment of clarity arrived not in a dramatic intervention or a rock-bottom collapse, but in something quieter and somehow more terrifying. Jamie looked at herself in the mirror one morning, preparing for another day of performance, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not physically, though the pills had taken their toll there too, but spiritually. She saw a ghost, a woman so consumed by numbing herself that she had numbed away everything that made her human. Her late mother Janet's voice echoed in her memory, the psycho's scream, and Jamie realized with horror she was living her own version of that shower scene, dying slowly, frame by frame, while the world watched and saw nothing. She made a decision that day. Cold turkey. No dramatic rehab facility, no public confession. Just a private war fought in the silence of her own home. The withdrawal was hell. Shaking, sweating, sleepless nights where her body screamed for the very thing destroying it. Christopher stood by her, helpless but present. And slowly, agonizingly, Jamie clawed her way back. She later became one of Hollywood's most vocal advocates for addiction recovery, speaking openly about her decade-long battle. "I was a high-functioning addict," she told People magazine in 2018, "and that almost killed me. Because when you're functioning, no one thinks you need saving, including yourself." While battling addiction in the shadows, Jamie was simultaneously building something she had never truly known: a real family. Her marriage to Christopher Guest defied Hollywood's curse. Where her parents' union had crumbled under the pressure of fame, hers endured. Guest was different from the men who populated her industry. Quieter, more introspective, content to exist outside the spotlight's glare. He directed quirky mockumentaries like This Is Spinal Tap and Best in Show, films that celebrated oddballs and misfits. Perhaps that's why he understood Jamie, a woman who always felt like a misfit in her own legacy. But their path to parenthood was marked by heartbreak. Jamie struggled to conceive. Month after month of hoping, praying, medical consultations, each negative test a small death. For a woman whose childhood was defined by emotional absence, the inability to become a mother felt like a cruel inheritance, as if her own fractured upbringing had rendered her incapable of creating a healthier one. Then came a different choice: adoption. In 1986, Jamie and Christopher adopted their daughter, Annie. Holding that baby girl in her arms, Jamie felt something shift. This child would not be born into the chaos of Hollywood royalty, would not inherit the burden of famous grandparents or the pressure of legacy. This child would be chosen, wanted, loved deliberately. 9 years later, in 1996, they adopted a second child, Ruby. 2 daughters. A family built not on biology, but on choice, on commitment, on the conscious decision to break cycles and create something new. Jamie threw herself into motherhood with the intensity she brought to everything. She stepped back from Hollywood, turning down roles to attend school plays, soccer games, bedtime rituals. The woman who had been starved for parental presence as a child became fiercely, almost obsessively present for her own children. She wrote children's books, Today I Feel Silly, Where Do Balloons Go? It's Hard to Be Five, stories about emotions, identity, and the struggles of growing up. The books were tender, honest, and clearly drawn from her own unhealed wounds. Through them, she was parenting not just Annie and Ruby, but also the little girl inside herself, who had never been properly nurtured. But even as she built this sanctuary of family, shadows lingered. The pills were gone by the early 2000s, but recovery is not a straight line. She attended recovery meetings quietly, anonymously, sitting in church basements alongside strangers who knew nothing of Laurie Strode or Tony Curtis. There, she was just Jamie, an addict in recovery, and that anonymity was its own kind of healing. Her daughters became her anchor. When career disappointments stung, when Hollywood's ageism began its inevitable assault, when the demons of addiction whispered temptation, she had something more valuable than fame to fight for. She had two young girls who called her Mom, a title more meaningful than any award. Years later, she would say with fierce conviction, "My sobriety and my family are the only things I'm truly proud of. Everything else, the movies, the fame, the awards, it's all just noise compared to the miracle of being present for my children." But that presence, that miracle, would soon be tested in ways Jamie never imagined. For 25 years, Jamie believed she knew her younger child, Ruby, the baby they adopted in 1996, the little one who grew into a bright, creative soul. The child Jamie had poured her heart into raising, determined to give what she never received. Then, in 2021, Ruby came to her with news that shattered everything Jamie thought she understood. "I'm transgender. My name is Ruby. I'm your daughter." The child Jamie had raised as a son was a daughter. For Jamie, the revelation was seismic. Not because of prejudice, but because of grief. A complicated, confusing grief that she struggled to articulate without sounding like the very parents she had resented. She had to mourn the child she thought she knew, while simultaneously celebrating the child who was finally revealing her true self. It was disorienting. Pronouns that felt wrong on her tongue until they didn't. A name that sounded unfamiliar until it became the only name that mattered. The process of unlearning 25 years of assumption and relearning how to see, truly see, the daughter who had always been there but hidden. Jamie, to her immense credit, did what her own parents never did for her. She listened. She educated herself. She attended P-flag meetings, read books about gender identity, consulted with therapists. She asked Ruby questions with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, she transformed her confusion into unconditional support. In 2021, she spoke publicly about Ruby's transition for the first time, her voice carrying both pride and residual uncertainty. "It's speaking a new language. I'm learning to speak a new language. But Ruby is my daughter, and I will learn whatever language necessary to love her properly." The journey was not without stumbling. There were moments of misgendering, slips of the tongue that brought tears to both their eyes. There were difficult conversations about what transition meant, about surgeries and hormones and identity. Jamie, who had built her career on performance, had to learn that this was not a performance. This was Ruby's truth, her authentic self, and Jamie's role was simply to witness and affirm. But the most painful part was watching Ruby struggle in a world not built for transgender people. The discrimination Ruby faced, the violence threatened against trans youth, the political battles that turned her daughter's existence into a culture war talking point, all of it enraged Jamie in ways that made her past battles seem trivial. She became an advocate, not quietly, but loudly. She used her platform to speak about trans rights, to defend trans children, to call out the cruelty of legislation targeting people like Ruby. When politicians attempted to ban gender-affirming care, Jamie's response was fierce. "You're talking about my daughter. You're trying to legislate away my child's right to exist authentically." The irony was profound. Jamie, who had spent her childhood feeling unseen by her famous parents, was now using her fame to ensure her daughter was seen, protected, celebrated. The cycle was breaking. The wound was healing, not perfectly, but genuinely. In 2022, Ruby married her partner in a ceremony that Jamie and Christopher hosted at their home. Photos surfaced of Jamie in an elegant suit, beaming with pride, her arm around her daughter. The image was more than a wedding photo. It was a portrait of redemption, a mother who learned to love beyond her own limitations, a daughter brave enough to live her truth, a family that chose each other, again and again. Jamie later reflected with raw emotion, "Ruby has taught me more about courage than any role I've ever played. She is the bravest person I know, and if loving her, supporting her, celebrating her makes me controversial, then controversy is a badge I'll wear with honor." But beneath the advocacy and pride, Jamie carried private fear. Fear for Ruby's safety in an increasingly hostile world. Fear that her own fame might somehow make Ruby a target. Fear that she wouldn't always be able to protect her daughter the way she wanted to. And that fear, that protective maternal instinct, would later fuel something unexpected. A ferocious return to the very franchise that made her famous, this time with something more than screams to offer. By the mid-1990s, as Jamie approached 40, Hollywood began its inevitable retreat. Roles dried up. Casting directors stopped calling. The industry that had once been unable to escape her screams now seemed to forget she existed. Ageism in Hollywood is a special kind of cruelty for women. Men age into distinguished and experienced. Women age into difficult to cast and past their prime. Jamie, who had fought so hard to be seen as more than a scream queen, now fought to be seen at all. The roles that did come were humiliating. Someone's mother, someone's wife, background figures in stories about younger, more marketable actresses. She was offered nothing with depth, nothing with complexity, nothing that recognized she had only grown sharper, funnier, more interesting with age. Then came 1994, and with it, a miracle named James Cameron. Cameron, fresh off Terminator 2's success, was casting True Lies, an action comedy starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. The role of Helen Tasker, a bored suburban housewife who discovers her husband is a spy, required someone who could do comedy, action, vulnerability, and sexuality. Cameron saw something in Jamie that Hollywood had stopped seeing: a star. Jamie was 35 when she shot the now iconic striptease scene, dancing in black lingerie, awkward and human and devastatingly sexy. The scene became legendary, not because of perfection, but because of authenticity. Jamie made Helen's nervousness, her fumbling attempts at seduction, feel painfully real and relatable. True Lies earned over $365 million worldwide and proved Jamie could carry a major blockbuster. She was nominated for a Golden Globe. Critics rediscovered her. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like vindication. But Hollywood's memory is short. True Lies didn't lead to a flood of great roles. It was an exception, not a new beginning. The wilderness continued. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, Jamie worked steadily, but without the recognition she deserved. She did television. She did independent films. She wrote her children's books. She stayed present, stayed working, but stardom felt like a distant memory. Then, in 2003, another miracle. Freaky Friday, a body swap comedy where Jamie played a mother who switches bodies with her teenage daughter, played by a young Lindsay Lohan. The film could have been disposable Disney fluff. Instead, Jamie poured her soul into it. She made the comedy physical, committed, fearless. She played a teenage girl trapped in a mother's body with such joy and energy that audiences fell in love all over again. Freaky Friday earned $160 million and reminded Hollywood why they had once been unable to look away from Jamie Lee Curtis. She was nominated for a Golden Globe again. The film became a beloved classic, but again, the momentum didn't sustain. A few good years, then back to the margins. By the 2010s, Jamie was in her 50s and 60s, an age where Hollywood typically discards women entirely. She worked when she could, advocated for causes she believed in, raised her daughters, attended her recovery meetings. She had made peace with the idea that her greatest work might be behind her, that Laurie Strode, Helen Tasker, and Freaky Friday's Tess Coleman would be the roles she'd be remembered for. She had no idea the greatest chapter of her career was still waiting, decades after it all began, in the shadows of Haddonfield. In 2018, 40 years after she first ran from Michael Myers, Jamie Lee Curtis returned to Haddonfield. Not for a paycheck, not for nostalgia, but to finish the story she started. Director David Gordon Green pitched a vision that finally treated Laurie Strode with the respect she deserved. Halloween would be a direct sequel to the 1978 original, erasing decades of convoluted continuity. This Laurie had spent 40 years preparing for Michael's return. She was traumatized, armed, ready. She wasn't a victim. She was a survivor turned warrior. Jamie said yes immediately. When Halloween, the 2018 version, was released, it shattered expectations. It earned $255 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film in the franchise. Critics praised Jamie's performance. Raw, fierce, vulnerable. She wasn't playing a scream queen anymore. She was playing trauma, survival, the cost of violence on the human soul. At 60 years old, Jamie Lee Curtis had reclaimed Laurie Strode and transformed her into something powerful. 2 sequels followed: Halloween Kills in 2021 and Halloween Ends in 2022. The trilogy allowed Jamie to explore Laurie's evolution from victim to survivor, to someone learning to live beyond survival. The final film, Halloween Ends, was divisive among fans, but Jamie's commitment never wavered. In the closing scene, Laurie finally destroys Michael Myers, literally feeding him into a grinder. 44 years after their first encounter, the final girl got her final word. Jamie later said, tears in her eyes, "Laurie taught me that survival is not weakness, that fear is not failure, that women who scream are not weak, they're fighting to live." And that meant everything to me. But even as she said goodbye to Laurie Strode, The universe was preparing one final gift, one final validation that would dwarf every triumph that came before. In 2022, at 63 years old, when most actresses her age had been relegated to grandma roles or disappeared entirely from Hollywood's radar, Jamie Lee Curtis received a script that made no sense whatsoever. Everything Everywhere All at Once. A sci-fi multiverse martial arts comedy drama about a Chinese-American laundromat owner who discovers she can access the lives of her alternate selves across infinite universes. Jamie was offered the role of Deirdre Beaubeirdre, an IRS auditor with sausage fingers in one universe, a sign-spinning expert in another, and a woman whose life intersected with the protagonists across dimensions. On paper, it was absurd. In execution, it was genius. Directors Dan Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, known collectively as Daniels, had written Deirdre specifically for Jamie. They saw in her something Hollywood had spent decades overlooking. An actress capable of playing comedy, drama, absurdity, and heartbreak often within the same scene. They saw a woman who had lived enough life, survived enough chaos, to bring authenticity to a story about fractured identity and infinite possibility. Jamie said yes, and she threw herself into the madness with total commitment. She learned martial arts choreography. She wore hot dog finger prosthetics. She played multiple versions of the same character across wildly different universes. She brought depth to a role that could have been a throwaway joke, making Deirdre human, wounded, desperate for connection in a life that had given her very little. When Everything Everywhere All at Once premiered at South by Southwest in March 2022, audiences erupted. The film was unlike anything they had seen, a kaleidoscopic explosion of imagination, emotion, and meaning. And Jamie's performance cut through the chaos with surprising tenderness. The film became a phenomenon. Not a typical blockbuster, it was released by A24, a small indie studio. But word of mouth spread like wildfire. Critics raved. Audiences returned multiple times, unpacking layers of meaning. By the end of its theatrical run, Everything Everywhere All at Once had earned over $140 million worldwide against a tiny $25 million budget. But more importantly, it became a cultural moment. A film about an immigrant mother struggling to connect with her family, about identity across infinite possibilities, about finding meaning in chaos. And Jamie, in a supporting role, became one of its emotional anchors. Then came awards season, Golden Globe nomination, SAG Award nomination, BAFTA nomination, and then the one that mattered most, Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. Jamie Lee Curtis, 64 years old, 45 years into her career, was nominated for her first Oscar. The Scream Queen, the actress dismissed as just horror. The woman who had fought addiction, raised her children, survived Hollywood's ageism and cruelty, was finally being recognized by the industry that had so often ignored her. On March 12, 2023, Jamie sat in the Dolby Theater at the 95th Academy Awards. Her husband Christopher beside her, her daughters in the audience. When her category was called and her name was read as the winner, she stood in shock. Walking to the stage, she clutched the Oscar like a lifeline. Her speech was not polished or rehearsed. It was raw, emotional, barely coherent at moments, and devastatingly honest. I know it looks like I'm standing up here by myself, but I am not. I am hundreds of people. I just won an Oscar. Her voice broke. She thanked the Daniels. She thanked her family. She thanked everyone who had supported her across a career that had been anything but easy. And then she said something that made millions watching around the world weep. To all of the people who have supported the genre movies that I have made for all of these years, the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, we just won an Oscar together. It was a moment of vindication, not just for Jamie, but for everyone who had been dismissed, overlooked, told they weren't good enough. For every scream queen, every genre actor, every person who had been judged for the work they did rather than the artistry they brought to it. At 64, Jamie Lee Curtis had done what seemed impossible. She had climbed back to the top of an industry that throws women away. She had proven that careers don't have to end at 40. That relevance isn't tied to youth. That talent, persistence, and authenticity can outlast every obstacle Hollywood places in the way. The Scream Queen had become an Oscar winner, and the girl who grew up invisible had become impossible to ignore. Today, at 65 years old, Jamie Lee Curtis lives a life that would have been unimaginable to the young woman hiding pills in bathroom cabinets or the child starving for her parents' attention. She wakes each morning in the same house she's lived in for decades, a modest home by Hollywood standards, especially for someone worth an estimated $60 million. No sprawling compound, no fleet of luxury cars, just a place where she built a family, raised her daughters, and learned what home actually means. Her sobriety, now over 2 decades strong, remains her daily priority. She still attends recovery meetings, still works the steps, still shows up to support others fighting the same battle she once fought. "Sobriety saved my life," she says without hesitation. "Everything good in my life came after I got sober. Everything." Her marriage to Christopher Guest has lasted nearly 40 years, a miracle in Hollywood terms. They are opposites in many ways, he quiet and reserved, she loud and passionate, but they have built something rare: partnership, mutual respect, a shared commitment to letting each other be fully themselves. Her daughters are grown now. Annie, her eldest, works as a dance instructor, living a life deliberately outside the spotlight. And Ruby, her younger daughter, is married and thriving, living authentically as the woman she always was. Jamie speaks of them with fierce pride, not for their accomplishments, but simply for who they are. "My daughters taught me how to love unconditionally," Jamie said in a recent interview. "They taught me that love isn't about control or expectations. It's about witnessing someone's truth and celebrating it, even when it's different from what you imagined." She continues to work, but selectively, no longer chasing roles or desperate for validation. She chooses projects that interest her, that challenge her, that align with her values. She's vocal about ageism in Hollywood, about the way women are discarded, about the need for better, more complex roles for actresses over 40. She writes children's books that explore emotions, identity, and self-acceptance, themes clearly drawn from her own journey. Each book is a love letter to the child she was and to children everywhere who feel unseen. She's become an activist, speaking loudly about addiction recovery, LGBTQ+ rights, and women's issues. When politicians attack transgender youth, Jamie doesn't stay silent. When Hollywood perpetuates ageism, she calls it out. She uses her platform not for self-promotion, but for advocacy. Her Oscar sits on a shelf in her home, a golden reminder that patience, persistence, and refusing to give up can lead to moments of magic. But she's clear about what truly matters. The Oscar is wonderful, but it's just a statue. My sobriety, my family, my authenticity, those are my real trophies. Physically, she has embraced aging in ways Hollywood rarely allows. No more surgeries, no filters, no pretending to be younger than she is. She posts photos on Instagram showing her gray hair, her wrinkles, her real body. "This is what 65 looks like," she declares defiantly. "And I'm proud of every line, every scar, every mark of survival." She's working on her memoir, a project she's approached with the same honesty she brings to everything. It will tell the truth about her childhood, her addiction, her career, her family. No sanitizing, no performing, just the raw, complicated, beautiful mess of a life fully lived. When asked what she wants her legacy to be, Jamie doesn't hesitate. "I want people to know that it's never too late, that you can survive what feels unsurvivable, that mistakes don't define you, what you do after them does, and that the greatest role you'll ever play is yourself." Jamie Lee Curtis's story is not a fairy tale. It's something better. It's real. She was born into Hollywood royalty, but raised in emotional poverty. She found fame young, but was immediately trapped by it. She survived Michael Myers on screen, but nearly didn't survive her own demons off it. She was dismissed, typecast, forgotten, and told her time had passed. And yet, here she stands, an Oscar winner at 64. A woman who redefined what aging looks like in Hollywood. A mother who learned to love beyond her own wounds. A recovering addict who turned her greatest shame into her greatest strength. A scream queen who proved that screaming, surviving, and fighting back are not weaknesses. They're the most powerful things a woman can do. Her journey offers something Hollywood rarely provides: hope. Not the cheap, easy kind, but the hard-earned kind that comes from falling, failing, and choosing to stand back up anyway. To the young actress told she's not pretty enough, not talented enough, not the right kind of enough, Jamie's Oscar proves that enough is a lie designed to break you. To the person battling addiction in silence, ashamed and afraid, Jamie's 2 decades of sobriety prove that recovery is possible and that your past does not dictate your future. To the parent struggling to understand a child who doesn't fit the mold you expected, Jamie's journey with Ruby proves that love means learning new languages, even when they're hard to speak. To every woman over 40 told her value has expired, Jamie's comeback proves that the best chapters can come when the world least expects them. And to anyone who has ever felt invisible, unworthy, or forgotten, Jamie's entire life proves that being seen starts with seeing yourself clearly, scars and all, and refusing to apologize for your survival. She didn't win by playing the game Hollywood wanted her to play. She won by refusing to disappear, by continuing to show up, by bringing her whole complicated self to every role, every moment, every battle. 45 years after Halloween made her a scream queen, Jamie Lee Curtis is no longer running from Michael Myers, or addiction, or her parents' shadow, or Hollywood's expectations. She's walking forward, Oscar in hand, daughters by her side, sobriety intact, into whatever comes next. And that, more than any horror franchise or award or comeback, is her greatest triumph. Not that she survived, but how she survived. With honesty, with fight, with grace earned through falling and rising and falling and rising again. The scream has finally become a victory cry. Now, dear viewer, her story turns to you. What will you take from Jamie's journey? That it's never too late to transform your life? That survival is the first step, but living authentically is the real victory? That our wounds can become our greatest teachers? Share your reflections below. Subscribe for more untold stories. And remember, Jamie Lee Curtis spent 45 years proving that the woman they tried to define couldn't be contained by anyone's expectations but her own. For in every scream, in every scar, in every moment of survival, she showed us the ultimate truth. The greatest legacy is not perfection, it's persistence.